Well, I'm here with David Taylor. David is Associate Professor of Theology and Culture at Fuller Theological Seminary and Director of BREM, Texas, an initiative in worship, theology, and the arts. Welcome, David, to Conversations on Hope.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me, brother.
So let's start with the standard first question, man.
Okay.
What is your definition, or what's your view of Christian hope?
Well, I'll answer it this way. I teach systematic theology classes at Fuller, and we have obviously a section on eschatology. So I'll simply tell you what I tell my students when we start that section. I tell them three things, and then I'll just sort of append a brief fourth one. First thing is that hope is chiefly a who more than it's a what. Right? So if we want to understand the shape of hope, we have to look at the Father as the origin and the end of hope. Jesus is the one through whom we see actually hope played out, and the Spirit is one who makes hope happen, right?
Beautiful.
The second thing I tell them is that hope is not something that happens at the end. It's something that happens in the present in light of the end, right? And which may not seem like a radical idea for some, but I think a lot of folks come from traditions where hope and heaven, eschatology, they're all like far-flung future things.
Yeah.
And we're just hopefully, somehow reaching out to them instead of this is actually a present thing. And then the third thing I tell them is that hope is an active thing, not a passive thing. So it's not like a farmer who's looking up at the sky and wanting it to rain, but is incapable of making the heavens rain. It's more like folks who are marching in support of racial justice. That is the reconciliation and the justice that awaits us, we enact here and now. And or creation care, any of these things, is something that we participate in because Jesus himself is this agent of the future who sends the Spirit to us, and then we're, participating in that. Those are the three things I say. Beyond that, just to gently remind them that hope is not to be confused with optimism.
Yeah.
Not because optimism is a bad thing. I mean, it's good to be optimistic rather than pessimistic, I think. But that hope, and I guess this will connect to maybe material on the Psalms, is able to coexist as sort of this complex of emotions where joy and sadness can be neighbors rather than, opponents or enemies. So that's what I tell my students.
Man, that is so beautifully said. And to recap, it's a who, not a what.
Who, not a what.
It's a present thing, not just a future thing.
Exactly.
It's an active thing, not a passive thing.
Yes, sir.
And again, if you get the who right, that it's Trinitarian, then that's why it's active.
Exactly.
Is the agency of the Spirit through the church
right.
in our work here now. Yeah, that's so wonderfully said. And then it sits in a complex of other emotions, even though it's not in itself optimism.
Right.
So what your recent book is about the Psalms, and it's called Open and Unafraid. I've got it right in front of me. It's a wonderful book, David. Our whole worship staff, worship leaders, worship pastors across New Life Church, all the different congregations are reading it right now. And talk to me about this. What does hope look like in the Psalms?
Well, I know this will be predictable, but I'm going to mention three things. I mean, that's the way the brain works. I think of three things. But I would say three ways in which hope shows up in the Psalms. Hope first in the face of personal suffering. You see this in how the Psalms of praise arise out of context of suffering, not ignoring that suffering or simply wanting to be rescued from that suffering. And it's in that sense that praise declares itself in hope, not in a denial of reality. Unfortunately, a lot of our songs and prayers, haven't maybe fully grasped that. But that's what the Psalms offer us. The second is you have hope in the face of injustice. So according to the Psalms, vengeance is the way by which evil is defeated. Now, vengeance is not ours to exact. It is God's to exact. But that is the hope of the psalmist, is that God's it's not, you see, it would be too easy to say we want to be in favor of God's justice, but the vengeance part scares us.
Yeah.
But it's really the vengeance is sort of this larger complex that reckons with evil and wickedness and terror, all those, you know, terrible things in our broken world. Yeah. And so that's the word of hope when we stand face to face with evil or with enemies. And then the third.
Let me pause and interject something here, David.
Yes, please.
That in my book that's about to come out, Worship in the World to Come, there is this little comparison with some contemporary worship songs that we say are about hope versus some of the slave spirituals. And when you look at the spirituals, they are singing about the future, but they're singing about the vengeance of the Lord. They're singing about a great reckoning. You know, that is a source of hope.
Man, I just saw the movie Mudbound last night. Oh, it's so good and so wonderfully disturbing, like appropriately, you know. Well, we won't go into detail. Sorry. You can watch it.
Go back to your third point now.
Yeah, my third is as it relates to the language of new song, which, you know, these are things I write about in the book, but most commonly people read the language of new song in the Psalms and think of it as a new composition, which is fine. It's one of the senses. A second sense is this new experience of grace, the language that we might use from the New Testament. But then the third is this new song as a song that comes to us from the future. And so Psalm 149 has this injunction to sing a new song, but it's written by people who are in exile. And so the psalmist is inviting the people in exile to sing a song that names God's future final and full restoration. And so it's not so much a song to make you feel better, to console you, to comfort you, which is fine. That is one of the functions that these songs perform. But more deeply, it's a song that you sing yourself into the future.
Wow.
So you're not just naming it, but you're singing yourself into this future reality. And you're being caught up in something bigger and obviously larger than you. I love that idea, which is maybe a more smaller sense of the idea of new song, but man, talk about something that, you know, is ready to wear, as they say in the fashion world, for all eras of human history.
A way of singing yourself into the future, the eschatological sort of dimension.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to be a way to tie into that. Okay. In your chapter on sadness, you talk about lament, but then you talk about hope. And the image that you use is this image of dust, which I think is just so powerful. And this is an excerpt from your book here, Open and Unafraid. A number of psalms of lament lead a worshiper to the dust. Psalms 22:15b says, "You lay me in the dust of death." Psalm 44:25 says, "We are brought down to the dust. Our bodies cling to the ground." Within the context of the Psalms, the dust represents the opposite of voluntary worship. It's a place of misery and exhaustion. It's a place for the depressed. The dust is as low as it gets for the nefesh hayah, the living beings. Yet here in the dust, in the lowliness, a window of hope opens up for the faithful. For it is from the dust of the earth, the Adamah, the Adam, the human, that God forms our primeval parent Adam. Then it is also from this place of divine creativity that something new can be born. So the idea of hope and suffering, like you've said, or lament or sadness, they're not antithetical, that actually they can become the very nexus point of new creation.
And I find that a helpful idea, not just for like macro issues that play out on the political arena, but all the little stuff that each of us deals with, you know, in our marriages and our parenting and with our own parents, friends, things that we've prayed for years and years. And man, just to cling to these things, but to cling to them together, you know, and to say them out loud, because we so easily forget.
Yeah. So beautiful. Okay, last question. We'll sneak this in.
Yes, sir.
Real quick. We'll combine kind of two here.
Okay.
The arts and music. You blog at The Arts Pastor, right? How do the arts inform and inspire our hope?
Okay, so I'll use this as an example. This is the cover of my other book on how the arts form us. This painting was one that I commissioned for our church in Austin. And it was for Eastertide 2005. And it's 9 foot tall by 20 foot wide. And it's on the back wall of the sanctuary. And I wanted it there so that when we finished our worship together, that was the last thing that you saw when you exited this space and time of worship. As a way to say that a song of hope or art of hope isn't only offering us a vision of the new creation. And really, I think we need visions of the new creation, not like more heaven stuff, which is nothing wrong against heaven, but it's really more new. Yeah. Okay. But it's a song that it's not just, I see what it is, but it charges my imagination and sort of the saturating, rewriting kind of the code of how I see the world, so that I can live all the, mundane, quotidian, boring, ordinary parts of my life in light of the new creation. Right. And so the artwork has this concentrated capacity to, recharge our imaginations with a vision of the new creation. So I was so grateful for the work originally, and now I get to have it on a book, which is wonderful.
Incredible.
Yeah. So that's it.
So the arts offer us an imagination and an invitation into this sort of creation.
Yeah. So they help us to see, but then they're also rewiring our broken imaginations, so that then all of a sudden I can't not see my world around me except with this new lens.
Beautiful. Thank you, David Taylor, for joining me on this episode of Conversations on Hope.
Thank you, sir.